On February 1st, 1979, a white-bearded man in a black turban stepped off an Air France jet in Tehran. Millions flooded the streets. Women wept. Men chanted. The entire city shook with a single name, Khomeini. The Ayatollah had returned from 15 years in exile to claim his country. Within weeks, the American-backed monarchy, one of the wealthiest, most powerful regimes in the Middle East, collapsed like a house of cards. The Shah, who called himself the King of Kings, fled into the desert, and the embassy, where CIA operatives had once planned coups, was overrun by students who took 52 Americans hostage for 444 days. How did it happen? How did America's closest ally in the Middle East become its greatest enemy? The answer begins 26 years earlier, in the summer of 1953, with a democratically elected prime minister who made a fatal mistake. He tried to take back his country's oil.
In 1951, Iran was not a dictatorship. It was a constitutional monarchy with a functioning parliament and competitive politics. The man running the country was a frail, eccentric, but deeply popular politician named Mohammad Mossadegh. Mossadegh had one obsession: Iran's oil. For decades, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, what we now call British Petroleum, had controlled Iran's petroleum industry. They extracted billions. They paid Iran a fraction of the profits, and they treated Iranian workers like servants. When Mossadegh became prime minister, he decided to end it. On May 1st, 1951, his government nationalized the oil industry. The Majlis, Iran's parliament, had voted overwhelmingly in favor. The streets of Tehran erupted in joy. Young Iranians tore down British signs and danced on the ashes of colonial contracts. Britain was furious. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company was the crown jewel of its empire. Losing it was unthinkable, so London launched a global boycott of Iranian oil, starving the country of revenue, and began planning something darker. They called in the Americans. The United States had its own reasons to fear Mossadegh. It was the height of the Cold War. Any nationalist leader who challenged Western interests was seen as a potential communist. And Mossadegh had tolerated the Tudeh Party, Iran's communist faction. That was enough for the Eisenhower administration. In August 1953, the CIA and Britain's MI6 launched Operation Ajax, a covert coup designed to topple Iran's elected government. The operation was run by Kermit Roosevelt, grandson of President Teddy Roosevelt. Its methods were simple and devastating: propaganda, bribery, paid mobs, and clerical manipulation. The CIA drafted a detailed propaganda playbook. They bribed Iranian newspapers to run anti-Mossadegh stories. They paid street thugs to stage violent protests. They convinced key military commanders to switch sides, and they manipulated religious leaders into declaring that Mossadegh was a threat to Islam. The Shah, a weak, indecisive monarch who had already fled the country once, was initially reluctant. But the CIA bribed and pressured him into signing two decrees, one firing Mossadegh, one appointing a pro-Western general in his place. On August 19, 1953, the coup succeeded. Mossadegh was arrested. The Shah returned from exile in Rome, and Iran's brief experiment with democracy was over. What followed was 26 years of dictatorship. The Shah, propped up by American money and weapons, ruled Iran as his personal kingdom. He banned all political parties. He muzzled the press. He created a brutal secret police force called SAVAK, trained by the CIA and Israel's Mossad, that arrested, tortured, and killed anyone who dared oppose him. In 1963, he launched the so-called White Revolution, a package of land reforms, women's suffrage, and industrialization that was supposed to modernize Iran. On paper, it sounded progressive. In reality, it was a cover for autocracy. Opposition was not tolerated. Religious leaders who criticized the Shah were arrested or forced into exile. One of them was a previously obscure cleric named Ruhollah Khomeini, who had spoken out against the White Revolution in 1963 and was sent to Turkey, then Iraq, then France. The Shah did not know it yet, but he had just created his own gravedigger.
Here is what I want you to think about. The CIA destroyed a democracy to install a dictator. That dictator, with American support, ruled through torture and fear for 26 years. And when the people finally rose up, their rage was directed not just at the Shah, but at the country that had put him there. Now, here's the question I want you to answer in the comments. If a foreign power overthrew your government tomorrow, would you forgive them 26 years later? Or would you burn their embassy? Because in 1979, Iran gave its answer.
By 1978, Iran was a powder keg. The Shah's secret police had made enemies of everyone: students, merchants, intellectuals, religious conservatives. The economy was collapsing, inflation was soaring, and the Ayatollah Khomeini, broadcasting fiery sermons from exile on smuggled cassette tapes, was telling millions of Iranians that the Shah was a puppet of America. In January 1978, protests erupted. The Shah's military fired on crowds, people died, and every death created 100 more revolutionaries. The revolution was not led by a single group. It was a coalition of strange bedfellows: communists who wanted a workers' state, nationalists who wanted democracy, and Islamists who wanted a theocracy. But they all agreed on one thing: the Shah must go. By December 1978, millions were flooding the streets of Tehran. The Shah's army, demoralized and outnumbered, began to melt away. On January 16, 1979, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the King of Kings, the beneficiary of Operation Ajax, the man the CIA had installed 26 years earlier, fled Iran. He never returned. 2 weeks later, Ayatollah Khomeini landed in Tehran. A national referendum was held. An overwhelming majority voted to abolish the monarchy and establish an Islamic republic. But the revolution was not yet finished with America. In October 1979, President Jimmy Carter made a fateful decision. He allowed the deposed Shah to enter the United States for medical treatment. In Iran, the reaction was volcanic. For 26 years, the Shah had been America's man. Now, Americans were giving him sanctuary. On November 4, 1979, a group of Iranian students, calling themselves the Muslim student followers of the Imam's line, stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. They took 52 American diplomats and citizens hostage. Their demand: return the Shah to Iran to face trial. The Shah never returned. He died of cancer in Egypt in 1980. But the hostages remained in captivity for 444 days. Through a failed American rescue mission that left 8 U.S. servicemen dead, through the election of Ronald Reagan, through the collapse of Jimmy Carter's presidency. When they were finally released on January 20, 1981, the Islamic Republic of Iran was firmly entrenched. The country had been transformed from America's closest ally to its most implacable enemy.
So what is the lesson of this story? It is not simply that the CIA made a mistake in 1953. It is that actions have consequences, often consequences that take decades to unfold. The men who planned Operation Ajax thought they were securing American interests. Instead, they created an enemy that would outlast a dozen presidents and shape the Middle East for generations. And here is what gives me hope. Because the Iranian people today are not the same as their government. The streets of Tehran in 1979 were filled with students who wanted freedom. The streets of Tehran today are filled with young women who refuse to wear the hijab, with protesters demanding basic rights, with a population that has consistently rejected the theocracy that replaced the Shah. The story is not over. It never is. The lesson is that every generation faces a choice. Do we learn from history or do we repeat it? Do we understand that overthrowing democracies leads to blowback, or do we keep making the same mistakes? In 1953, America chose to overthrow a democracy. In 1979, Iran chose to overthrow a dictator, and the world is still living with the consequences. The question is, what will we choose next?